So I've been away for a little while, and I suppose I should explain why, but I will reintroduce myself. Hello, I'm Odin Azazel, and I'm 37. I've just been diagnosed with autism and ADHD. I've been thinking really long and hard whether I want to do this video or share my experiences. I've taken a couple of weeks away from streaming just to reconstruct my thoughts and reflect. So about 2.5 years ago, I had what I now know as a autistic meltdown. This was one of multiple ones I've had in the past. This was probably the largest and most impactful, what led to any relationships that I had ended and leaving my job and really isolating myself for the best part of a year with not having contact with any of my family really and just shutting the door to everybody. A little after this meltdown, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. That was from consistent burnout and mental fatigue, and has resulted in full-out body pain and fatigue. Some days I sleep the majority of the day and night. Most other days I'll have total insomnia. With autism and ADHD, they're bipolar forces, so your brain's constantly fighting it all the time. I don't present as a typical autistic individual. So I walked into a mental health research consultation with the psychiatrist. The first thing I said to the psychiatrist was, I'm not autistic because I'm extremely good at reading people. I notice every single pattern and change with them. I feel empathy really deeply and I relate to every single systematic change in my body. For most people, what is subconscious, I process it consciously. I'm consciously aware of my surroundings at all times. I read situations extremely well. I get humour and know how I'm being perceived the majority of times. I notice subtle changes in anybody. So I was like, I'm not autistic, I can't be autistic. I notice too much on the social level and within myself. At the end of that 2 hours, both me and the psychiatrist agreed I'm probably autistic. So more recently, I've been doing some research, and much like diabetes, you can be in a hypo or hyper state. So with autism, what does that look like? Usually, an individual with autism will be in a hypo-dominated autistic state. They may struggle with identifying empathy to read social situations and social cues. But on the bipolar opposite, you can be in a hyper state of dominated autism. For me, imagine the brain is the floodgates, and an atypical brain will automatically siphon out information it needs to know, so it will put it in the back of your subconscious. You're not consciously aware that you're doing it, but you have behaviors that has become automatic, so you don't really need to put a lot of processing power behind it. For myself, I process everything all of the time. I'm processing a person's eye contact, my eye contact, the facial expressions, the smell of the room, what's happening behind me right here. I'm concentrating on the heat, the tone of my voice, how I'm being perceived, the conversation, what's happening, maybe the other side of the room, the sounds, the smell, the glare of the lights, anything and everything my brain is processing constantly, and I'm consciously aware of all these processes and constantly trying to self-regulate myself in my communication. So I'm adjusting course as I'm talking. And obviously being part of the research team was I don't present like an atypical or normal, what you'll typically see with autistic individuals. Now, I put that in inverted comma because two autistic individuals are not the same. It's a wide spectrum, and the spectrum isn't a line. It's a profile of traits that you can be dominated in one area and not any in another. So it can present itself very differently depending on the individual, and also depending on the coping strategies that developed over the years. It's really more to do with a whole family of traits, what are deeply rooted. You can't be a little bit autistic. You can't be a little bit ADHD. The spectrum isn't a line. It is deeply rooted traits that is at the foundations of your functioning. You don't get a little bit OCD because you're tidy or you're clean freak, or you don't get a bit of autism because you like things in routine. So the psychiatrist said, I can't diagnose you within this clinic because that's not what the clinic does. However, I can refer you to your GP to recommend you go down the right to choose pathway for a autism assessment, which I did. Now, the lead up to the assessment fills you with absolute dread, anxiety. It is a nerve-wracking process. And I particularly went down the right to choose because my anxiety around waiting and the unknown. What I found particularly helpful on the lead up to getting a assessment was to write down all the traits I noticed about myself and analyze myself on a day-to-day basis, and just jotting down what I noticed about my behaviors, what I struggle with, how I function as an individual. Then, with the help of ChatGPT, I structured that in a presentable format, as it was just brain diarrhea. And I was able to email that off to the assessor prior to the assessment. What really relieved a lot of my anxiety with information recall on demand. I have memories as far back as nursery school, what obviously isn't typical for somebody to remember as far back as that. I remember conversations, key details, and random memories from years and years ago. My memory is structured where it's triggered, very much like complex PTSD. I can have a sight, a smell, a sensory stimulation, and it will relate back to a memory, almost like a pop. And I'm in that moment right there and then, and I'm processing that moment and correlating it with the moment that I'm in at present. But I struggle with demand recall. For me, is if somebody asks me a direct question, I will struggle to recall that information unless it's pre-scripted or I expect the question to be coming. So being able to write it down prior really helped me to alleviate a lot of that anxiety that I'm not going to forget a shed load of information that could come back as a false negative with not being able to recall how I function. What really leads me on to how I've been undiagnosed for so many years. I pre-plan every eventuality in a conversation and interaction, every avenue within that interaction before it comes. So I have a pre-idea of what that interaction looks like in my head. And I'll try script scenarios. I'll constantly be thinking about this, whilst also processing everything else around me. And these sort of processes, along with my environmental changes, the conversations I'm having, me pre-scripting conversations in my head, it's all adjacent to each other, all happening simultaneously. If you go watch any of my videos or any of my shorts, you'll see how I'm presenting now isn't how I present usually. Even now I'm talking in packets, really processing and being meaningful with each one of my sentences. Sometimes the sentences don't even complete before I do my full stop, but then rethink about the end of my sentence. But that's how much of a contrast it can be from unmasking. Now, with a diagnosis, what it may do is give you closure to some situations in the past. During the assessment, you will be asked some questions. Now, I won't get into the exact details of the assessment for the simple reason is if you are autistic and you're watching this, and you go for assessment, to have that pre-idea in your head before you enter that situation, you're going to start structuring scenarios for yourself, what could go either way on your assessment. So it's best to try not overthink it. I know that's pretty hard. It's definitely practice what you preach, but you want to go in there as naturally as possible for yourself. My autistic assessment was structured in 3 parts. So there's several assessments that you can have prior to your actual assessment, what is paper-based. They correlate very similar to each other in the facts of they'll ask you about your daily functioning, but also be very focused on your early developmental years. So they'll be looking at what your life looked like, particularly before you was an adult, because you may have overcompensated as an adult and may have learned some coping strategies. These forms, usually it will ask somebody who knows you well to complete, and you will also complete one for yourself. Unfortunately, I didn't have anybody that knew me well. Don't worry too much about that because there's other factors and other stages within the assessment. I had a pre-assessment with a autistic specialist before my actual assessment with a psychiatrist. There was great anxiety on me getting in that assessment, then realizing that, oh crap, I've got another God knows how long to wait until the actual assessment. So this initial screening asked me about my past and my childhood and any special interests that I had when I was younger, and really about your friendships and relationships at a younger age, and whether you met all your milestones. Now, particularly for me, I was slow in my speech. I developed a speech impediment and a stutter. I was a SEND child all the way through school and senior school. When I got into my second year of college, I went from being a SEND student and barely scribbling passes, having extra times in my exams, and having special equipment. I then went to distinctions. And the top turning point for me was they said, this is the marking criteria, your pass, your merit, your distinctions. For me, it was then simple, it was structured, it was transparent. I wasn't guessing on what to do anymore. I just had a list to follow. So I got a distinction straight away. I then would repeat to complete level 5 in health and social care, and then later with the management qualifications and also a HR degree. I remember the assessor asking me a question about how I brush my teeth. And there was another one what was to do with storytelling, where they would show you and tell you a story on the first slide, and then you was to interpret the rest of the story. After my assessment, I wasn't satisfied with my answers, so I contacted my assessor with what I thought should be the answers. I believe I sent a total of 3 emails across. I laugh in hindsight because it was probably the most autistic thing I could do at the time with not thinking I was autistic. A couple of weeks later, I had my psychiatric assessment, and he dug much deeper. And I got to the end of that assessment, and he told me that I am autistic, and he also suspects ADHD. And I cried for many reasons. There was remorse and regret, and that I had wasted my life not knowing, and that things could have been different if I understood. And relief also, because if it wasn't autism, then what was wrong with me? What made life so difficult? Why did everything seem so challenging? And why do I seem so different and alienated from everybody else? Now, it particularly wasn't an easy process for myself because I had to admit a lot of things that I wouldn't admit. And the last time I admitted anything close to it was in a big blowout, just as I was melting down. And I just told everybody who would listen what was in my mind, what made me the most isolated I've ever been in my life. And that's really something, because when you go through life feeling alone every single day, you then find another level of loneliness. So this is a topic I will divulge because it's a particular trait of autism and it's important. But some people may be sensitive to the topic. With autism, you often break down because your brain is constantly on the go. This can be psoriasis, IBS, fibromyalgia, where you get chronic pain and fatigue throughout your body. It also can affect your mental health substantially. And you get a thing called ideation. Unfortunately, a lot of the times ideation with intrusive thought presents itself into suicidal ideation, which is a thing I've suffered throughout my whole life. And that's the intrusive thought of thinking about that event, planning that event, and really envisioning what that event would look like. To give you an example, I remember completing an NHS workbook on mental health, and I had to stop because it lists 5 things that you live for. And I started to complete this list, and I soon realized that I was completing this list on the basis of treating it like a to-do list of what to remove before anything happened. Now, ideation is not always linked to actually wanting, but it is an intrusive thought that's with you pretty much every day. You can never live in the moment and never truly be happy because you always have this almost inner voice and these inner visions. Now, these aren't controllable. I mentioned about a pop earlier. So let's say Tourette syndrome, you have a tic, or you have obsessive compulsive disorder and repeat task. Now that is compulsive and obsessive, and so is ideation. So if somebody's self-harming, which I don't, it don't mean that they've also got another type of ideation. It doesn't mean that they don't value things in their life, and it doesn't mean that they want to do or end anything. Same with somebody with this type of ideation. It doesn't mean that anything's going to happen to them, but it also doesn't mean that it won't. It's almost like an internal war that you have to fight with every single day. Some battles you lose and some battles you win, but every day is exhausting. And you are forced by society to mask who you are. I'd built up this persona of somebody who I liked to be. Also, I evaluated everything I liked about other people. I used to say in job interviews, I'm like a chameleon, I can fit in anywhere. But it wasn't until this diagnosis I realized what it was, being a chameleon and not really having any self-identification. I certainly started thinking that, who am I really if I stripped everything away? And if I didn't feel like I had to mask to fit in, who would I be? You start questioning what's real. And this also is another thing with the autism assessment, is imposter syndrome. It's feeling like you don't belong. Are you just faking it? Are you just making it up? And going through that thought process, thinking that it's not that serious. Surely this isn't something that aligns with yourself. There was one question in the autism assessment, and they said, what did it feel like to be happy? I said, I can tell you what it feels like to be anxious and sad. I can tell you what it feels like to be nervous, because it has systematic things in your body. You can feel them happening, your tension, your gut wrenches. I can tell you what it's like to be depressed, but then I said, I'm not sure even if I've ever felt truly happy. I've never been in the moment where I wasn't thinking instantly something unhappy. Or I would do a laugh. I laugh on stream. I laugh in groups. I laugh at work. But when I laugh, it is me presenting a tone, a method of communication, so the other person can read me. So anything that I present within my communication isn't naturally presented. I'm thinking about my expressions as I'm doing them. I'm thinking about my eye contact. I'm thinking about my tone of voice. I'm thinking about whether I should laugh, about the fluency of my voice. So at this point in the assessment, I found it really difficult, where it hit me like a wrecking ball. And that was a realization that I may be autistic. You'll have to bear with me because I go on off track, I deviate, and I get back to what I was getting to. And that's the ADHD side of me, unfortunately. So after the assessment, I really started to think about all the interactions that I've ever had and what had gone wrong in every single one of them interactions, or what has broke down previous relationships, or where I found it difficult to maintain or create meaningful relationships, because I can do transactional relationships, but meaningful relationships is something I really struggle with. After the assessment, a lot of things start making sense. Yeah, I can say it comes with a lot of regret. And with this, they say you've got to give yourself grace, that you've got to learn to forgive yourself first. So this is why I've been away from streaming. I'm very inconsistent. Before that was giving myself that grace time to really process and really reflect on myself. I guess I'm still processing. I'm processing the whole life here, and I'm 38 now. I swear, I started this video saying I'm 37. That's how long the video has gone on for. So I've taken a little bit of time. I've reached out to a couple of people just to say I appreciate them, and also reached out sending my apologies to some other people. And I've got a long journey ahead of me, and this is just the beginning. So there's definitely a regression period after a assessment where you'll probably notice more traits and you will naturally unmask more, even if you don't want to. So what does this mean for the future? Nothing really needs to change. You are still yourself, even if you struggle with self-identity. But you can now adjust and make reasonable adjustments for yourself and request reasonable adjustments. And you may just start to realize what's burning you out, what things you struggle with and why. What may give you some closure. With that, I will be returning back to streaming soon. I'm not sure how soon it is. I guess the biggest change for myself is I now give myself time to process emotion. If I'm feeling particularly overwhelmed or have an instinctive impulse, I now take that away to give myself time to process them thoughts. Often come back and structure what I want to communicate without the instinctive emotion attached with it. And as I look back, a lot of interaction where I've genuinely felt groups of people turn against me is really that miscommunication of being misunderstood. And unfortunately, society can't change that for you. I believe that within coping strategies, you've got to learn ways to communicate neurotypically. I may be wrong, but a lot of relationship breakdowns will be down to communication, and not to do with intention, but to do with misinterpretation. So I find it particularly helpful to sit with my thoughts for a little bit. I made myself a promise when I restarted doing streaming again was, if I can't bring my A game, I can't project the best of myself, I won't stream. I'll sit and I'll think and structure my thoughts, because the internet isn't always the best way to communicate your intrusive or intrinsic thoughts. And maybe I will get there one day, and maybe the character will be me. But until then, I'm on a journey and I live every day for my daughter. I'm not going nowhere. I'm really trying to be the best human I can be. I mess up a lot. What gives me satisfaction and fulfillment is doing right by others. So when I stream, if I can make anybody happy, even just one person, that's enough for me. I really hope that was recording.